Alright, so today we're going to be talking about Going to Meet the Man by James Baldwin. It was written in 1965. So my first question is, what's the purpose of James Baldwin writing this story? Because we know that he's like a black man who was a civil rights activist and a gay rights activist. So like, what is his purpose in writing about a twisted like white man who finds pleasure in like the suffering of black people? What's like the significance between that? Like, what is he really trying to get to?
So I think the message that James Baldwin is trying to emphasize with the character of Jesse, who's the protagonist, right? He's a protagonist. I think he's trying to like emphasize on how sadistic and inhuman like the act of racism is.
Yeah, so like I feel like he's just trying to critique how like also like how people like grow up to be racist and not like they aren't originally always racist, and they talk about that like with Baldwin touches on that with the parents of Jesse, which we see in the story. Like he flashbacks back to how he really became racist, right?
Yeah, Gabby, I would like to share I would like to add what you said. Like in the beginning of the story, you can like see that his wife is asleep, like he's not really paying attention to him. And I think that symbolizes like a clue of help. Like Jesse wants to be heard and share his thoughts about like the whole racism thing in his age, and I think he like tries to escape from this racial world that he's living in. And yeah, you can see like as he reflects on the actions that like he's about to take next day to break up the registration, like as a sheriff. And I also like how Baldwin, well, I think this is like what Baldwin is trying to like explain in his story. Like he tries to play with Jesse's attitudes, and he portrays all of like history's racial conflicts, like one of them being like the sexual provocativeness of like black race to the white mind, and the way black people are like portrayed, and typical assumptions about black inferiority, and I also think that Jesse's story is like about the white role in the racial struggle, as seen like in his memory and like his self being, which is not just personal but also racial.
Right.
To add to that, I think that with this whole message of how like racism isn't like you're not born with it and everything, I think he built upon that with kind of like his sick like sexual his sick like sexual fetishes with like black people. I think he's trying to like he's like trying to emphasize on how unnatural and like and totally like disgusting like racism is, and he like compares it to like he kind of like represents it with these like sexual tensions. Yeah,
I feel like James Baldwin, like I think that James Baldwin is just trying to show that people don't start as being racist, that they basically they grow up to be racist. And it's kind of like this is proven when he talks about his friend Otis, and it says right here, he had a black friend his age 8 who lived nearby. His name was Otis. They wrestled together in the dirt. Now the thought of Otis made him sick, and that's on page 240. So like, and then after this quote, like he starts to talk about how his father like took him to that hanging of the black man where they burned him. And so like clearly the kid Jesse didn't have a problem with like black people before, but like as his parents start to teach him like basically the ways of being racist, like he starts to have a problem with him. And like so I think that's the real point of James Baldwin writing this story, is to show that before he didn't really have a problem with black people, and like it's like the influence of the parents that like really caused him to have this deep hatred for black people.
Yeah, like we can see on 247 how like he's horrified at the image of this black man being lynched, and then it says on the second paragraph, he turned his head a little and saw the field of faces. He watched his mother's face. Her eyes were very bright. Her mouth was open. She was more beautiful than he had ever seen and more strange. He began to feel joy he had never felt before. He watched the hanging, gleaming body, the most beautiful and terrible object he had ever seen till then. So it's like there's this like natural, like there's this natural
glorification. Yeah, so like his parents, he saw that his parents were like glorifying this like horrible action, and so now he is seeing that, or starting to think that it's okay.
So I would like to build upon this topic. So in the scene of the in page 247 about the burning man and that whole tragedy, I think it affected Jesse's mental health in the future. Like, in the beginning of the story, in page 229, he states he could not ask her to just do a little thing for him, just to help him out, just for a little while, the way he could ask a nigger girl to do it. So I think that this quote shows how Jesse has like a sexual pleasure towards black women, and it's ironic because he portrays it as like something bad, and this is how Baldwin villainizes racism in a disgusting act. Also, I would like to share another quote in page 249, in the second paragraph, where like in the end of the story, he actually gets an erection, just thinking about like the whole burning scene. So in the second paragraph, he states, he thought of the boy in the cell, he thought of the man in the fire, he thought of the knife that grabbed himself and struck himself, and a terrible sound, something between a high laugh and a howl, came out of him and dragged his sleeping wife up and on one elbow. So that means like, so this is like the end of the story where he finally got an erection, just having a thought of this racial and these events, these and these tragic events. And yeah, this kind of ties back with what Gabby saying, that one is not born racist. In fact, as they grow, influences kind of affect and shape like a person's mind, like Jesse's, like over like his time period, like he experiences events which shape his mind and like makes him racist, and like a small part of his childhood, like the burning scene and like meeting this African American kid, like his neighbor, kind of like follows him, and it helps him reflect on his actions, and it kind of affects him positively and negatively.
Now that we've really analyzed how Jesse's surroundings and his culture have affected him and his racial views, to what extent I'd like to pose a question, to what extent do our surroundings influence our personal beliefs? We see Jesse being affected by his parents and the lynching culture, which helped him become a racist, and like how do our surroundings affect us, and is this necessarily a good thing or is it a bad thing?
Yeah, well, I think about like when I think about this kind of stuff, I think about like the state of California and how a lot of the people here are very liberal, and then when you go to more of like the central states, they're more like right hand sided. And so I feel like it's because of their like surroundings. So because a lot of the like central states usually have that mentality of being conservative, then that's why a lot of people are very conservative, whereas here in California we're a lot more liberal, so we're a lot more open to new ideas. And so I feel like that's really even it's been a thing in the 1960s and it's still a thing today.
Similarly to what Gabby was saying about like growing up in an area which is Democratic and Republican, I think that a more narrow topic would be kind of like growing up. Everyone is taught of how a man and a woman should act, and I think that kind of affects an individual as they grow up. Like a man is taught to not show feelings and be this macho man, and like they're taught to have like a certain role in society, and I think that kind of affects each person as they grow up, and they kind of like kind of lose their identity, and like kind of affects them negatively. And that like totally relates to the story of how like Jesse is influenced by like his surroundings and like his parents, and like he grows up very racist. And it's similar to like what I was saying, like a person grows up like being in their bubble, like being the person they were taught to be as they were growing up, just like Jesse.
And actually, I think this whole idea of how our surroundings and how our cultures and communities affect our personal identities, I think it could be connected to the theme like of othering, because if we're not like everyone else, we're going to be exposed and we're going to be cast away, because that's what naturally happens. If you see someone who isn't like you and they don't think like you and they don't want to be like you, you're not going to associate themselves. And then we've seen this in Things Fall Apart and in Heart of Darkness. We see how Noye is effeminate and sentimental, and he's considered like more or less an outcast. And so is Okonkwo's father, who was like a failure. And then we see that in Heart of Darkness with, who was it?
Captain Kurtz, right?
Kurtz, yeah, with Kurtz, and how he kind of like others himself from this. He like isolates himself from this like European environment, and then eventually like loses his mind. So like I think that Jesse kind of like had to accept, like, no, he didn't have to. It was like natural for him to become like his surroundings.
So like he was taught to other.
Yeah.
That's like a thing.
He was,
And I feel like today that's a thing. That's still a thing. Like parents teach their kids to like say these people are good and these people are not good, and that's othering. Like in a more like it's this like a societal version of othering, where it's like parents teach it to their kids and then the kids teach it to their kids, so it's like this ongoing cycle.
Yeah, and I think that's sometimes a good thing but also bad, because when you have this kind of like fear of being isolated, you become closer to your communities, you know? Like in San Jose, there's lots of like immigrant rights and lots of like Latino and people of color like movements and things like that, and if you're on the opposite side, you might be like villainized and kind of rejected. But like in the South, that it might be the opposite, you know? If you have these ideas that promote people of color and like social welfare and things like that they might not entirely agree with, then you'll be othered, you know? So it's like it's a good thing because it can like create tighter
but
communities.
It could also separate whole communities, like the bigger range of communities. What do you think, Francisco?
Well, I would like to end this discussion by highlighting the fact that James Baldwin used the theme of othering to not just bring black people together, but white people, as you can see in the scene in page 247, about how when they were burning the man, all of the white people came together to see the black person getting burned. But also, as you can, it will contrast this scene in 232 where it states they had the line, to register. He laughed, but she did not. She did not, and they wouldn't stay where Big Jim C wanted them. No, they had to start blocking traffic all around the courthouse so them to despair, and they wouldn't move. They just kept that singing, and Big Jim C figured out the others would move if the nigger would move, and so on.
So that's when the black people start to come together and sing together, right?
That's when they were protesting about like their rights, and that type of othering made them
brought
come
the black
together.
people together.
Yeah, they came together, and I think that's what James Baldwin wanted to say, or wanted to give that message in his reading.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, we see kind of like how othering is really determined by our social norms and our stereotypes, and because of its foundation on society and its perspective, it's really subjective, and it's really it can be manipulated. It can be manipulated because we see how it's the pre-established social norm is to like hate black people, to suppress them, to participate in this power dynamic that oppresses and sometimes like sexualizes black people. And then throughout when the civil rights movement starts gaining momentum and global support, we see kind of how there's this inversion of social norms, and how society now, especially like in this demographic and like California's demographic, how it's not acceptable to oppress and subjugate other people based on their looks or their beliefs.
Yeah, so now we other the racist people.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, this was a great story.
This was a great story.
Thank you, Miss Bailey.
Thank you, Miss
Thank
Bailey.
you, Miss Bailey.